I want to talk about source compatibilism. This is one that I find to be hard to get my head around, so it'd be good just to dive
Okay.
into it a little bit. So, source compatibilism is kind of made famous by Harry Frankfurt's paper from 1969, in which he gives us cases that are now known as the Frankfurt case. So, I
hmm
guess it'd be helpful to understand a little bit about the sort of what Frankfurt cases are, how Harry Frankfurt gave us this idea of source compatibilism. If it did actually initiate with him, I might be wrong about that. But yeah, basically, what is source compatibilism, Taylor?
Yeah. So it's the true and right view that everyone should accept. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. I think Frankfurt cases are helpful for kind of getting into the framework of a source compatibilist, but then it doesn't stop there. Like, even if you're not really taken with the Frankfurt cases, and a lot of people are kind of annoyed by them because they get really complicated and the debate gets very technical. I happen to love that debate, even to its intricate details, but there are plenty of people who don't, and that's fine. What I think people should take away from the Frankfurt cases, or setting those aside, what they should think about when they think about sourcehood views is like, can we explain a person's control? Can we explain their responsibility in terms of things that don't have to do with being able to do otherwise, alternative possibilities? And Frankfurt definitely made this kind of view popular, but it's not uncommon to sort of read this framework into people from much earlier in the past. In the Christian tradition, I think St. Augustine from very early on was an advocate for this kind of view. Um, a lot of people think the ancient Stoics had this kind of view. And that whether they're theistic or not is it sort of depends on the Stoic philosopher. They did have the gods in the picture, but it's a little bit more naturalistic. In any case, the idea is, when you think about some choice that you've made that you took yourself to be responsible for, think about something you did. Think about what actually led to the choice or the behavior. So, like, when you decide to go to this university rather than that one, like, what is it that explains why you chose this university? Well, it might be that, like, you're interested in a subject matter that this university like specializes in or is known for. It might even been that you wanted to like study under a specific professor. It could be that it's like, close to home. It could be that the cost plays a role, like all these sorts of things. Um, is it that, like, when you make that choice and you take it to be your choice, it's up to you that you made that choice? Did you need to have been able to choose something else in order for this to have been your choice and for it to sort of reflect on you in a way that makes you accountable for it? Well, that's what the sourcehood theorist tends to call into question. So here's a Frankfurt case. Imagine that there's this guy, Jones, who is about to make a big decision. In a lot of the Frankfurt cases, it's like a voting decision, which makes it easy to kind of say he's making a choice between candidate A, candidate B. So he's got to make up his mind about whom to vote for. Maybe it makes a big difference. Maybe it's important to him, like who he ends up voting for. Okay. He's got good reasons for voting for candidate A. He's got some other reasons for voting for candidate B, and he just hasn't made up his mind yet. He's putting it off. He's going to actually do it in the voting booth. He's going to wait till the very last second, make a decision, and vote right then. Okay, so that's the story. And then it turns out, here's what makes it a Frankfurt style case. Here's where it gets really interesting. There's this other guy. In Frankfurt's original case, I think his name is Black. But there's this other guy who's like waiting in the wings. He's spying on Jones, and he's invested in what Jones decides and what he does. Maybe he's aligned with candidate A's political party or something like that. But he really wants Jones to decide to vote for candidate A. And so what he does is he sort of, and this is where things can, the details can differ from case to case, but suppose he puts this device inside Jones's brain. And Jones doesn't know about this at all. So this is a little sci-fi, but okay. He puts this device in Jones's brain, and what it lets him do, this sort of neuroscientist figure can monitor what Jones is kind of thinking about as he's deliberating between voting for A, voting for B. And ultimately, in addition to monitoring and being aware if Jones is kind of leaning towards B, he also has the ability to override Jones's decision-making power. So he has this like remote control, and if he presses the button like Jones will stop thinking and he'll just be like, oh, I'm voting for candidate A, right? So that's what he's able to do. But Jones goes to the voting booth. He's making his last minute kind of deliberations. Shows no sign that he's thinking about voting for candidate B. And so he decides to vote for candidate A and does so. And this neuroscientist who's monitoring the device doesn't ever press the button, doesn't have to. He just lets Jones make this decision and vote on his own. And so things unfold exactly as if we removed Black, this neuroscientist, from the situation altogether. Okay, so why is that an interesting story? It wouldn't make a good sci-fi story or movie, although there might be elements of it in certain other stories. There's this movie Arrival that's based on Ted Chiang's story called Story of Your Life, which I think has some of these elements, and it's a great story, and I love that movie. But anyway, what's interesting about the story is Frankfurt thought it called into question the principle of alternative possibilities, this idea that leeway freedom is required for moral responsibility. Why? Well, it looks like Jones doesn't have leeway freedom. It looks like he can't do otherwise than decide to vote for candidate A. After all, if there had been like any wavering or kind of, if he had been thinking about going the other way, he would have been forced to decide to vote for candidate A because Black would have pushed that button. So it looks like he can't do otherwise. And yet, people disagree on this too, but like most people, when they hear about this story, think, yeah, Jones, he voted, he made the decision on his own, right? He did it for his own reasons. It looks like it reflects on him just as much as if we do delete the neuroscientist from the story. So it looks like a case where someone is genuinely morally responsible. They're accountable for a decision and the action that kind of stemmed from it. And yet it looks like they're responsible without having leeway freedom. They couldn't have done otherwise in the case. So people disagree, of course. It's philosophy after all, but like some people argue, well, you can't really leave, leeway out of it. Like he could have still like tried to go the other way or lean the other way before the intervention happened. Other people think, well, yeah, he lacks alternatives. He really doesn't have leeway freedom, but also he lacks moral responsibility. But a lot of people have been really moved by this case because they think it is kind of obvious that he's morally responsible, and it looks like he doesn't have leeway freedom. And so that's the kind of primary, at least in 1969 and the 70s, that was sort of the primary kind of motivator for a sourcehood compatibilist view.
It's really interesting. I guess kind of this nefarious character, Black, who's placed a device within Jones's brain. We could just rename them to Musk, and the device could be the Neuralink. That's the way it's done in the year 2024.
That's right.
So I guess a way that kind of some people might be thinking about this, like I have when I was reading it within your book and kind of listening to it as well through other conversations you've had, is that I guess no matter how we sketch it, we're kind of getting the same inputs into this individual, and it's pulling through the agent to provide an output. So always saying that kind of source compatibilism is almost kind of coming down to sort of just agent action, and really it's about kind of where the moral buck sits, given the consequences of the actions of the agent. Is that what we're kind of trying to funnel this down into? Is that right?
That's a good question. I think for Frankfurt, yes, that's basically what it amounts to. It's like once you look at the the like causes that come right before the agent's choice and their actions, as long as the agents kind of set up the right sort of way where they're doing what they most want to do, requires some work to spell out exactly how that works. But look, doesn't matter if there's this counterfactual intervener, the neuroscientist, or Musk. It doesn't matter if maybe the Neuralink is actually doing some intervention beforehand, but it makes them such that they now want to vote for candidate A and they do it. All that matters is sort of the action, and it's stemming from the agent in a way that reflects them or their true self, their real self, or something like that. You don't have to say that to be a sourcehood compatibilist. In particular, there are what I think of as sourcehood compatibilist views, including John Martin Fisher's and others, that build in a kind of historical condition on freedom and on the conditions for responsibility. So on some views, if even if you made a choice or you did the action in just the way that Frankfurt thought was required and was sort of sufficient for responsibility, if you were sort of set up in a way that wasn't up to you, it like kind of you didn't have ownership of this way of thinking, if it's sort of alien to the true you, that might undermine your responsibility. So there are historical versions of this kind of compatibilist view. My own work on this is like to take a kind of middle path where I think if you meet the kind of Frankfurt type conditions, you're at least a little bit responsible. But I think there's a difference between someone who has shaped themselves into being the kind of person who wants to vote for candidate A on the one hand, and someone else who has all the same reasons at that time to vote for candidate A, but only because some Musk type agent nefarious in the wings has changed their values and made them want to vote for that kind of candidate. I think that person's not as responsible as the person who had a say over their character. So I guess on my view, like it's not just the action; it's also kind of like what the action is explained by, internal to the agent, and then the story about how they came to be constituted in that way might also shape their degree of responsibility.
It's really interesting. I think just two things that were kind of coming up in my head as you were speaking there, and I guess we could, I'm not saying we will, but we could begin to bring in the idea of kind of social media, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is, like people kind of becoming kind of alt-right or alt-left, or being kind of programmed to buy certain things by advertisement. Like there's loads of other ways that you could spin this same thing. So that was one thing that was kind of going through my head, is it's interesting to view this through the idea of sort of advertisement or being sold things through third parties. The other area that's really interesting, I mentioned I've been reading quite a lot of Swinburne recently. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago for the show, and he kind of makes the point time and time again that if theism's true, it should be expected that God is going to give each individual the ability to make different choices to go down path A and path B. And if they go down path B, so that's the bad path, and path A is the good path. The next time they're presented with a new path to go down path A or path B, if they've gone down the bad path before, it's going to be easier to go down the bad path next time. And you see this being played out. He uses examples like, the Holocaust or whatever it is. But the reality that they're going to be provided with different kind of the ability to do other than they've done before by picking the good path, but it's going to be so much harder for them given the character they've developed due to the decisions they've made. I think this also feeds into it as well. It's really interesting to think about that sort of map that we painted of that individual's life that's highlighted. At the very start of that map, they could have become a famous musician, they could have become a drug addict, they could have died at the age of 3, like so many paths, and they're going to be able to push themselves into certain directions theoretically through making different choices and different decisions. And this sort of drug addict end result is going to be diminished if they're picking certain options, and it's going to be increased if they're picking other options. And all of this feeds into it. It's such a rich area. Anyway, that's not really a question, Taylor, but any sort of thoughts to riff on that?
Yeah. I guess that sounds really, I'm excited to hear your conversation with Swinburne on this. I think that sounds right. Like, this idea, I see it as going back at least to Aristotle, where certain habits or, making certain choices can make, subsequent sort of adjustments to your character that can influence how you act down the line. That's something that's animating a lot of my research on luck, and it's related to manipulation and, the kinds of things we've just been talking about. I guess I do think what ultimately matters for our responsibility is sort of what we do with the opportunities that we're given. And, or to use another expression that's common, I think John Martin Fisher has made this popular in the free will debate, but like playing the cards that you're dealt, right? So like maybe I could never have become a famous musician. I certainly could never have become a famous singer. Like if you've ever heard me sing, that like that just wasn't in the cards for me. But it might be that I'm still responsible for like, the kind of philosopher that I am, or like whether I, put in hard work on this article or not, or that sort of thing, even if this other possibility that's very remote wasn't really available to me. So I think of it as like, when it comes to any particular choice or action that we're responsible for, it's like, what was in your control at the time? And I just think the conditions for control there don't require that you had a genuine alternative possibility. I think it's about you're playing the cards in the way that you do.
If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version, and everyone can access the audio-only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.